Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings quarterback picks for week 2. The first guy that's on the top of the list for me this week is going to be Drew Brees. Brees goes up against Tampa Bay. He cost $7,800 this week. Now, last week, Marcus Mariota tore apart that Tampa Bay defense. Tampa Bay did not generate much of a pass rush against them. Their secondary was pretty weak. He was able to pick them apart, and they had a lot of guys who made plays and then had runs after the catch. So I think that this week with a better quarterback, or at least a more experienced quarterback like Drew Brees, I think he's going to have a much easier time this week than he did against that Arizona team last week that does have some speed and does have some pass rushers and kind of forced the Saints into playing a little bit of a dump-off game. Brees still wound up throwing for 355 yards, but a lot of it was on those swing passes to the running backs. Kerry Robinson as well as Mark Ingram both had a lot of catches out of the backfield. I think they wound up with 150 yards receiving out of the two running backs, which is something you don't see very often. I think he'll be able to throw the ball down the field a little bit more in this game, which puts a guy like Brandon Cooks a little bit more involved in the game plan. I know a lot of people were expecting a big week out of Cooks last week, and he really didn't deliver, which probably only helps keep his ownership level down a little bit this week. So I'm really looking forward to see what the two of them can do down the field. I think Cooks is a little bit more of a dynamic receiver than a guy like Kendall Wright, who I like also, but I think Cooks is a little bit better. So after seeing what Kendall Wright was able to do to that secondary, I definitely think that Cooks is going to be able to, pull off something similar. I'm not too worried about this game getting away from them. The Saints defense isn't all that great. They do give up a lot of points. So I think that Tampa Bay might be able to put up a few more points here than they were able to do against Tennessee last week. If the game stays close, that only means that Brees is going to throw for more. And even though he threw for 355 yards last week, he only threw for one touchdown pass. So I'm hoping that he can get in the end zone a little more than once this week and, get over 300 yards again and really pay off that salary. The next guy I want to talk about, who I also think is in a really good spot, is Carson Palmer at 6,700 against the Chicago Bears. Let's see. He threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns last week against New Orleans. And Aaron Rodgers against the Chicago Bears last week didn't throw for a ton of yards, but he didn't really need to. But he did have the 3 touchdown passes against them when he did really need them to help make that count. This Bears team is a team that I think you can throw against. They were, pretty easy to throw against last year, which is why everybody was picking Aaron Rodgers in week 1. And that Arizona passing attack is pretty dynamic. A guy like John Brown is a legitimate star receiver in this league. I mean, this guy is really, really, really good. Larry Fitzgerald is still a guy who can go in and get some possession receptions for you. And that doesn't even really include a guy like Michael Floyd, who's still banged up and hasn't been playing much. Even the tight end, Darren Fells, looked really, really good last week. I don't know if I love him enough to put him in rosters this week. I want to see him do it a little more consistently. It could have just been a 1 week fluke kind of thing because they were so worried about the receivers on the outside. But again, I mean, Palmer is a guy who, if you give him some time, he can pick a team apart. And this Arizona team looks like they're going to be able to, the offensive line looks like they're going to be able to hold up and give him some time. So I definitely think that he could have a big game here as well. I wouldn't rule out another 300-yard passing game with a couple touchdowns. And because his price is a little bit cheaper than the guys like Brees and Rodgers up top, I think he's a pretty solid play at only $6,700 this week. Another guy who I think is a little bit of a sneaky play and somebody that I'm going to have some GPP exposure to is going to be Teddy Bridgewater of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I know he didn't look all that great at the beginning of the game on Monday night, but think about it this way. Last week, Phillip Rivers went absolutely crazy against that Detroit defense. And the reason for that is Detroit is very tough to run against. So if you can't run against the Detroit defense, you're going to have to put the ball in the air in order to move it up the field. Now, a guy like Bridgewater, like I said, he didn't really have a very good opening weekend, but I do think that this Detroit team is a team that you're going to have to game plan to pass against. So I think that with Bridgewater having a pretty good preseason, I'm willing to overlook the bad game that he had here for a tournament play. I definitely don't think I would use this guy in cash. But at $6,400 for a tournament play, I think he's cheap enough where he makes an intriguing option for me to look at. Next guy that I want to talk about is Jay Cutler. Cutler's price is also really cheap this week. He's only $6K going up against that Arizona team. Now, as we said before, that Arizona team has a lot of speed and does get a pretty good pass rush. So what I would be looking for out of Cutler here is something similar to what they did last week with Drew Brees against that Arizona team. a lot of quick passes out of the backfield. Things that can go to a guy like Forte, maybe a big usage of a guy like Martellus Bennett. I think that is probably the way that they're going to be able to move the ball and get it up the field. This Arizona run defense is actually pretty stout, so I don't know if handing the ball to Forte and letting him bang his head against the wall is going to be the way they should go about this. But I do think that you can get some of those quick swing passes, get Forte on the outside in space, and he will be able to, pick up some yardage that way. That's going to mean that Cutler is going to have a lot of yards that are picked up on some easy completions that he should be able to make out of the backfield, which are yards that add up pretty quick for him. If he's able to hook up with a Bennett or a Alshon Jeffries for a touchdown or two, I think he's going to give you really good value considering that his price this week is only $6,000. The last guy I want to talk about is Nick Foles. Nick Foles is going up against that Washington Redskins defense that allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks last year in 2014. Now, Foles had a pretty good game in the opener. He threw for 297 yards and a touchdown pass against a Seattle defense that we all think of as one of the best in the league. So if he can do that against a team like Seattle, I think he's going to be able to have an even bigger game against a team like Washington here today. I think that the way you want to try to attack Washington is with the pass. And the thing I like most about Foles is he's only $5,500, which is incredibly cheap. If he's able to throw for 300 yards and one touchdown, he basically pays off his salary. If he gets you a second touchdown there, he's going to be one of those value-added guys that makes a lot of sense to use in a tournament. And I think that he's going to have some tournament upside at the price that he's at here. I'm still trying to figure out which one of his receivers I would like to link him with. He does spread the ball around. A lot of guys had a bunch of catches. Even a tight end like Jared Cook was able to get a bunch of them last week. So I don't know who I would want to really target to use with him. Again, Brian Quick was inactive last week. I'm not really sure why. He seems to be the best receiver they have on that St. Louis Rams team. But, hey, we can't really argue about it. If Quick is out next week, that only means that the catches are going to be consolidated to a smaller group of players. But I do think that Foles is definitely somebody you have to take a look at, if only because of the price of $5,500 and the matchup he has with the Washington Redskins. So that goes through the 5 guys who I'm really looking at this week, 5 guys who I think you should look at to put into your rosters. There are a lot of high-scoring games that are out there. I don't think Tony Romo is going to have a huge week. I hear his name mentioned a lot. I think without Des Bryant, they're going to try to lean on the run game as much as possible. So just be careful there. I know we usually like to take quarterbacks when they're going up against Philly, and I know a lot of people are talking about Romo this week, but I just don't really see how he's going to have a huge game, basically throwing the ball to Terrence Williams and Jason Witten this week. So that's just the last little nugget I wanted to leave with you guys. Thank you for joining us here at RotoCurve, and as always, stay classy, DFS.